Chapter 9. Jonah swallowed by a big fish. In the book of Jonah, containing 4 chapters, we are told the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up against me. Instead of obeying this command, Jonah sought to flee from the presence of the Lord by going to Tarshish. For this purpose he went to Joppa, and there took ship for Tarshish. But the Lord sent a great wind, and there was a mighty tempest, so that the ship was likely to be broken. The mariners being afraid, they cried every one unto his God, and casting lots, that they might know which of them was the cause of the storm, the lot fell upon Jonah, showing him to be the guilty man. The mariners then said unto him, What shall we do unto thee? Jonah in reply said, Take me up and cast me forth into the sea, for I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. So they took up Jonah, and cast him into the sea, and the sea ceased raging. And the Lord prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah ivus in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord out of the fish's belly. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. The Lord again spake unto Jonah, and said, Go unto Nineveh, and preach unto it. So Jonah arose, and went unto Nineveh, according to the command of the Lord, and preached unto it. There is a Hindu fable, very much resembling this, to be found in the Somadeva Bhatta, of a person by the name of Saktadeva who was swallowed by a huge fish, and finally came out unhurt. The story is as follows. There was once a king's daughter who would marry no one but the man who had seen the golden city, of legendary fame, and Saktadeva was in love with her. So he went traveling about the world seeking someone who could tell him where this golden city was. In the course of his journeys he embarked on board a ship bound for the island of Usthala, where lived the king of the fishermen, who, Saktadeva hoped, would set him on his way. On the voyage there arose a great storm, and the ship went to pieces, and a great fish swallowed Saktadeva whole. Then, driven by the force of fate, the fish went to the island of Usthala, and there the servants of the king of the fishermen caught it, and the king, wondering at its size, had it cut open, and Saktadeva came out unhurt. In Grecian fable, Hercules is said to have been swallowed by a whale at a place called Joppa, and to have lain 3 days in his entrails. Bernard de Montfaucon, speaking of Jonah being swallowed by a whale, and describing a piece of Grecian sculpture representing Hercules standing by a huge sea monster, says, Some ancients relate to the effect that Hercules was also swallowed by the whale that was watching Hesione, that lie remained 3 days in his belly, and that he came out bald-pated after his sojourn there. Boucher, in his Hist. D. Animal, tells us that, the great fish which swallowed up Jonah, although it be called a whale, yet it was not a whale, properly so called, but a dogfish, called Carcharias. Therefore in the Grecian fable Hercules is said to have been swallowed up of a dag, and to have lain 3 days in his entrails. Godfrey Higgins says, on this subject, the story of Jonah swallowed up by a whale is nothing but part of the fiction of Hercules, described in the Heraclid or Labors of Hercules, of whom the same story was told, and who was swallowed up at the very same place, Joppa, and for the same period of time, 3 days. Lycophron says that Hercules was 3 nights in the belly of a fish. We have still another similar story in that of Arion the musician who, being thrown overboard, was caught on the back of a dolphin and landed safe on shore. The story is related in Tales of Ancient Greece, as follows. Arion was a Corinthian harper who had traveled in Sicily and Italy, and had accumulated great wealth. Being desirous of again seeing his native city, he set sail from Taris for Corinth. The sailors in the ship, having seen the large boxes full of money which Arion had brought with him into the ship, made up their minds to kill him and take his gold and silver. So one day when he was sitting on the bow of the ship, and looking down on the dark blue sea, 3 or 4 of the sailors came to him and said they were going to kill him. Now Arion knew they said this because they wanted his money, so he promised to give them all he had if they would spare his life. But they would not. Then he asked them to let him jump into the sea. When they had given him leave to do this, Arion took one last look at the bright and sunny sky, and then leaped into the sea, and the sailors saw him no more. But Arion was not drowned in the sea, for a great fish called a dolphin was swimming by the ship when Arion leaped over, and it caught him on its back and swam away with him towards Corinth. So presently the fish came close to the shore and left Arion on the beach, and swam away again into the deep sea. There is also a Persian legend to the effect that Jemshid was devoured by a great monster waiting for him at the bottom of the sea, but afterwards rises again out of the sea, like Jonah in the Hebrew and Hercules in the Phoenician myth. This legend was also found in the myths of the New World. It was urged, many years ago, by Rosenmuller, an eminent German divine and professor of theology, and other critics, that the miracle recorded in the book of Jonah is not to be regarded as an historical fact, but only as an allegory, founded on the Phoenician myth of Hercules rescuing Hesione from the sea monster by leaping himself into its jaws, and for 3 days and 3 nights continuing to tear its entrails, that the story is an allegory, and that it, as well as that of Saktadeva, Hercules, and the rest, are simply different versions of the same myth, the significance of which is the alternate swallowing up and casting forth of day, or the sun, by night, is now all but universally admitted by scholars. The day, or the sun, is swallowed up by night, to be set free again at dawn, and from time to time suffers alike but shorter durance in the maw of the eclipse and the storm cloud. Professor Goldziher says, the most prominent mythical characteristic of the eatery of Jonah is his celebrated abode in the sea in the belly of a whale. This trait is eminently solar. As on occasion of the storm dragon or the storm serpent swallows the sun, so when he sets, he is swallowed by a mighty fish, waiting for him at the bottom of the sea. Then, when he appears again on the horizon, he is spit out on the shore by the sea monster. The sun was called Jonah, as appears from Grader's inscriptions and other sources. In the Vedas, the 4 sacred books of the Hindus, when day and night, sun and darkness, are opposed to each other, the one is designated red, the other black. The red sun being swallowed up by the dark earth at night, as it apparently is when it sets in the west, to be cast forth again at day, is also illustrated in like manner. Jonah, Hercules, and others personify the sun, and a huge fish represents the earth. The earth represented as a huge fish is one of the most prominent ideas of the Polynesian mythology. At other times, instead of a fish, we have a great raving wolf, who comes to devour its victim and extinguish the sunlight. The wolf is particularly distinguished in ancient Scandinavian mythology, being employed as an emblem of the destroying power which attempts to destroy the sun. This is illustrated in the story of Little Red Riding Hood, who is devoured by the great black wolf, and afterwards comes out unhurt. The story of Little Red Riding Hood is mutilated in the English version. The original story was that the little maid, in her shining bed cloak, was swallowed by the great black wolf, and that she came out safe and sound when the hunters cut open the sleeping beast. In regard to these heroes remaining 3 days and 3 nights in the bowels of the fish, they represent the sun at the winter solstice. From December 22d to the 25th, that is, for 3 days and 3 nights, the sun remains in the lowest regions, in the bowels of the earth, in the belly of the fish. It is then cast forth and renews its career. Thus, we see that the story of Jonah being swallowed by a big fish meant originally the sun swallowed up by night, and that it is identical with the well-known nursery tale. How such legends are transformed from intelligible into unintelligible myths is very clearly illustrated by Professor Max Miller, who, in speaking of the comparison of the different forms of Aryan religion and mythology in India, Persia, Greece, Italy, and Germany, says, in each of these nations there was a tendency to change the original conception of divine powers, to misunderstand the many names given to these powers, and to misinterpret the praises addressed to them. In this manner some of the divine names were changed into half-divine, half-human heroes, and at last the myths, which were true and intelligible as told originally of i.e. sun, or the dawn, or the storms, were turned into legends or fables too marvelous to be believed of common mortals. This process can be watched in India, in Greece, and in Germany. The same story, or nearly the same, is told of gods, of heroes, and of men. The divine myth became an heroic legend, and the heroic legend fades away into a nursery tale. Our nursery tales have well been called the modern patois of the ancient sacred mythology of the Aryan race. How striking are these words, How plainly they illustrate the process by which the story, that was true and intelligible as told originally of the day being swallowed up by night, or the sun being swallowed up by the earth, was transformed into a legend or fable, too marvelous to be believed by common mortals. How the divine myth became an heroic legend, and how the heroic legend faded away into a nursery tale. In regard to Jonah's going to the city of Nineveh and preaching unto the inhabitants, we believe that the old myth of civilization, so called, one is partly interwoven here, and that, in Tin's respect, lie is nothing more than the Indian fish avatar of Vishnu, or the Chaldean Can. At his first avatar, Vishnu is alleged to have appeared to humanity in form like a fish, 3 or half man and half fish, just as Can and Dagon were represented among the Chaldeans and other nations. In the temple of Rama, in India, there is a representation of Vishnu which answers perfectly to that of Dagon. Mr. Maurice, in his History Ilandastan, has proved the identity of the Syrian Dagon and the Indian fish avatar, and concludes by saying, from the foregoing and a variety of parallel circumstances, I am inclined to think that the Chaldean Oans, the Phoenician and Philistine Dagon, and the Pisces of the Syrian and Egyptian zodiac were the same deity with the Indian Vishnu. In the old mythological remains of the Chaldeans, compiled by Berosus, Abydos, and Polyhistor, there is an account of one Can, a fish god, who rendered great service to mankind. This being is said to have come out of the Erythraean Sea. This is evidently the sun rising out of the sea, as it apparently does, in the east. Professor Goldziher, speaking of Oans, says that this founder of civilization has a solar character, like similar heroes in all other nations, is shown. In the words of Berosus, who says, during the daytime Oans held intercourse with man, but when the sun set, Oans fell into the sea, where he used to pass the night. Here, evidently, only the sun can be meant, who, in the evening, dips into the sea, and comes forth again in the morning, and passes the day on the dry land in the company of men. Dagon was sometimes represented as a man emerging from a fish's mouth, and sometimes as half man and half fish. It was believed that he came in a ship and taught the people. Ancient history abounds with such mythological personages. Point 10. There was also a Durga, a fish deity, among the Hindus, represented as a full-grown man emerging from a fish's mouth. The Philistines worshipped Dagon, and in Babylonian mythology Otakon is applied to a fish-like being who rose from the waters of the Red Sea as one of the benefactors of men. On the coins of Ascalon, where she was held in great honor, the goddess Derceto or Atargatis is represented as a woman with her lower extremities like a fish. This is Semiramis, who appeared at Joppa as a mermaid. She is simply a personification of the moon, who follows the course of the sun. At times she manifests herself to the eyes of men, at others she seeks concealment in the western flood. The sun god Phoebus traverses the sea in the form of a fish, and imparts lessons of wisdom and goodness when he has come forth from the green depths. All these powers or qualities are shared by Proteus in Hellenic story, as well as by the fish god, Dagon or Can. In the Iliad and Odyssey, Atlas is brought into close connection with Helios, the bright god, the Latin soul, and our sun. In these poems he rises every morning from a beautiful lake by the deep-flowing stream of ocean, and having accomplished his journey across the heavens, plunges again into the western waters. The ancient Mexicans and Peruvians had likewise semi-fish gods. Jonah, then, is like these other personages, and so far as they are all personifications of the sun, they all come out of the sea, they are all represented as a man emerging from a fish's mouth, and they are all benefactors of mankind. We believe, therefore, that it is one and the same myth, whether Oans, Jonas, or Jonas, differing to a certain extent among different nations, just as we find to be the case with other legends. This we have just seen illustrated in the story of You Little Red Riding Hood, which is considerably mutilated in the English version. Figure number 5 is a representation of Dagon, intended to illustrate a creature half man and half fish, or, perhaps, a man emerging from a fish's mouth. It is taken from Layard. Figure number 61 is a representation of the Indian avatar of Vishnu, coming forth from the fish. It would answer just as well for a representation of Jonah as it does for the Hindu divinity. It should be noticed that in both of these, the god has a crown on his head, surmounted with a triple ornament, both of which had evidently the same meaning, i.e., an emblem of the Trinity. The Indian avatar being represented with 4 arms evidently means that he is God of the whole world, his 4 arms extending to the 4 corners of the world. The circle, which is seen in one hand, is an emblem of eternal reward. The shell, with its 8 convolutions, is intended to show the place in the number of the cycles which he occupied. The book and sword are to show that he ruled both in the right of the book and of the sword. Chapter 10. Circumcision. In the words of the Reverend Dr. Giles, the rite of circumcision must not be passed over in any work that concerns the religion and literature of that people. The first mention of circumcision in the Bible occurs in Genesis, where God is said to have commanded the Israelites to perform this rite and thereby establish a covenant between him and his chosen people. "This is my covenant, which ye shall keep, between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every male child among you shall be circumcised." We need not doubt, says the Reverend Dr. Giles, that a divine command was given to Abraham that all his posterity should practice the rite of circumcision. Such may be the case. If we believe that the Lord of the universe communes with man, we need not doubt this, yet we are compelled to admit that nations other than the Hebrews practiced this rite. The origin of it, however, as practiced among other nations, has never been clearly ascertained. It has been maintained by some scholars that this rite drew its origin from considerations of health and cleanliness, which seems very probable, although doubted by many. Whatever may have been its origin, it is certain that it was practiced by many of the ancient Eastern nations, who never came in contact with the Hebrews in early times, and, therefore, could not have learned it from them. The Egyptians practiced circumcision at a very early period, at least as early as the 4th dynasty, Pyramid I, and therefore, long before the time assigned for Joseph's entry into Egypt, from whom some writers have claimed the Egyptians learned it. In the decorative pictures of Egyptian tombs, one frequently meets with persons on whom the denudation of the prepuce is manifested. On a stone found at Thebes, there is a representation of the circumcision of Ramses. A mother is seen holding her boy's arms back, while the operator kneels in front. All Egyptian priests were obliged to be circumcised, and Pythagoras had to submit to it before being admitted to the Egyptian sacerdotal mysteries. Herodotus, the Greek historian, says, as this practice can be traced both in Egypt and Ethiopia, to the remotest antiquity, it is not possible to say which first introduced it. The Phoenicians and Syrians of Palestine acknowledge that they borrowed it from Egypt. It has been recognized among the Kafirs and other tribes of Africa. It was practiced among the Fijians and Samoans of Polynesia, and some races of Australia. The Susis and the Mandingos circumcised their women. The Assyrians, Colchians, Phoenicians, and others practiced it. It has been from time immemorial a custom among the Abyssinians, though, at the present time, Christians. The antiquity of the custom may be assured from the fact of the New Hollanders having practiced it. The troglodytes on the shore of the Red Sea, the Idumeans, Ammonites, Moabites, and Ishmaelites, had the practice of circumcision. The ancient Mexicans also practiced this rite. It was also found among the Amazon tribes of South America. These Indians, as well as some African tribes, were in the habit of circumcising their women. Among the Campos, the women circumcised themselves, and a man would not marry a woman who was not circumcised. They performed this singular rite upon arriving at the age of puberty. Jesus of Nazareth was circumcised, and had he been really the founder of the Christian religion, so-called, it would certainly be incumbent on all Christians to be circumcised as he was, and to observe that Jewish law which he observed, and which he was so far from abrogating, that he declared, "Heaven and earth shall pass away ere one jot or one tittle of that law should be dispensed with." But the Christians are not followers of the religion of Jesus. They are followers of the religion of the pagans. This, we believe, we shall be able to show in part 2 of this work.